I indicted him 4 times for 4 separate murders. Absolutely, absolutely. And I had Scarpa's son came up and helped us. When he walked into the office the very first day, I introduced myself and he said, Mike, if I okay, I call you Mike. I said, yeah. He said, Mike, I got to tell you, Gaspipe Casso, who's my cellmate, not my cellmate, my neighbor in AdMax, wants you to go talk to him. That's how I got to talk to Gaspipe. The lawyer never brought that deal to Gaspipe. Never told him about it.
Why do you think Gaspipe's lawyer didn't present your offer to Gaspipe?
That's a very, very good question. The only thing I can think of, I got this information about Eppolito. You want in. You want to open up this case. The Eppolito Caracappa Mafia Cops case had been closed for years, 10, maybe 12 years. And she finally came to him and said, I got a piece of information. And she gave him a piece of information about the case, about the Mafia Cops coming to her house looking for the son who was killed. And we opened up an investigation. What I found in the investigation of those cases and of that FBI agent was, let's just say that nothing that's happening today surprises me with the FBI. There were cases where we were working on them in Brooklyn and detectives were working on them, and there would be a hint of a federal connection. Feds would come in and steal the case and take credit for it. When we went down to Washington to talk to the counsel, who's now a federal judge for the FBI, to let her know what we were doing, what we needed help, etc., and we were hoping to get cooperation, etc. Rob, she made that visit as unfriendly and as Tommy got up and walked out.
Sammy Gravano. So, do you believe everything, all of his stories, all the stuff he's told you? Do you believe it? Because there is a lot of doubt over this guy. He's been discredited on the mob genre on YouTube by
Raimondi?
Almost every. Yeah, Raimondi.
Yeah.
By almost everybody.
Yeah, I know.
And what you're saying is you tend to agree with his story.
I do. For one very good reason.
Michael Vecchione. Great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thank you very much. And I want to thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Michael. Right, so in a nutshell, for like a minute or two, can you outline your life from like birth to now, if that's right, and then we'll unpick it.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn. It was I come from an Italian American background. My both parents, both of my grandparents, both sides of my mother and father, came from Italy and emigrated in the early 20s, and lived in Brooklyn I lived in Brooklyn until I was 19 years old. And finally, I still lived with my parents. I was in my first year of college, and they moved out to a borough that's east of Brooklyn, and it's called Queens, New York. And I lived in Queens until I got married several years later. And I became an attorney as a result of my first wife's uncle was a detective, first grade detective in the New York City Police Department. And he worked in the district attorney's office. He was sort of the third person in command's right-hand man. And when I told him I was going to law school, and I went to law school for my first year, he asked me if I was interested in becoming, doing an internship at the DA's office between my first and second year in law school. And of course I was. And I have to tell you, Rob, first day I was there, I was hooked because it was exciting. I was in a place that was really an action place, an action bureau called the Investigations Bureau. And we did a lot of things that kind of excited me. And when I was in law school, I loved criminal law. I knew that was what I wanted to get into. So when I graduated from law school, I interviewed with district attorney's offices in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in Queens, and in the Bronx. And I was accepted in every one of them. But I decided that I wanted to go to Brooklyn. I knew Brooklyn. It was where was my home. It was where I was, uh, where I cut my teeth, and so I went to work at the Brooklyn DA's office, and I stayed there for about 7.5 years, working my way through the bureau, through the various bureaus. And when I left, I was the deputy chief of the sex crimes bureau, and I left because a good friend of mine had was working for the soon to be Mayor Ed Koch, and he got a job from the DA's office in the police department, NYPD. He was what we call an administrative law judge. He would hear the cases involving police officers who violated rules and procedures, etc. And he asked me if they were looking for a prosecutor, someone to head the office of prosecutions in the NYPD, and I took the job. And I got the job and stayed there for about 3 years until both of us, my friend and I, decided that we were going to go off on our own, and we opened up our own law practice. And for the next 10 years, I practiced law. I was a defense attorney. I did civil law. I was a administrative law judge in various locations in the city, and I did a very, I tried to do as much as I could to expand my horizon, so to speak. And I loved it. I loved it until he decided, my partner decided, that he was going to go back into politics, and he left me by myself, and I ran my own law practice for about a year until a new DA in Brooklyn was elected, and I got a call one afternoon from a friend of mine who was now working for this new DA and said, "Hey, listen, we're looking for trial lawyers. And do you want to come back to the office? The pay is pretty good." And I got to tell you, Rob, by that point, I had had enough of dealing with clients who would stiff me on fees and that kind of thing. And I decided I'm going to go back to what I know. And I took the job at the DA's office with the new DA. Before I actually stepped foot into the office, they gave me a case to try. It was a very, very important case to the DA. It involved a young Hasidic Jewish girl who lived in Brooklyn who would use the Williamsburg Bridge, which is a bridge between Brooklyn and Manhattan, for exercise. She would walk on the bridge every day, to lose weight, etc. And for one Sunday morning, she was accosted by a junkie, a drug dealer, a drug user, who wanted to rob her, and she didn't have any money on her. He was actually very angry, dragged her to a very remote part of the bridge, and strangled her, killed her. Then he stripped her of her clothes, made it seem as if it was a sex crime because he wanted to throw the police off the scent, so to speak. He was not a sex offender. He was a junkie. And left her there. And then he hooked up with a friend of his later that day. And the friend was a woman who said to him, "Listen, you can't leave the body there. You got to do something with it. They're gonna find, maybe there's DNA, maybe there's this, that, the other thing that they could find. We've got to do something with it. Tell you what you're gonna do. We're gonna go to a gasoline station, and we're gonna get gasoline, and we're going to go back to the body and burn the body." And at that night, they went back to the bridge, to this remote part, set the body on fire, and burnt it to the point where all that was left were her teeth, a little piece of her bra clasp, and one shoe. That case set the Brooklyn Hasidic Jewish community and others on its ear when it happened. It wasn't solved, Rob, for a very long time, for almost a year, until by coincidence it was solved, and I got the case after another assistant DA had tried it, couldn't get a conviction because there was a problem with one of the jurors, and he left the office, and I got the case. Now, they gave this to me before I was actually sworn in as an ADA. They said, try the case, prepare it. When you come back, it's going to be yours. So when I started at the DA's office that second time, I walked in and they had promoted me already. I was now deputy chief of the homicide bureau. I hadn't done 1 second of work, but it was because of my reputation and because I had tried a million cases as a defense attorney, prosecutor. And 3 months later, I was the head of the trial division. I was head of the homicide bureau. Then I was head of the trial division and then head of the rackets division. And that's where I ended my career. Rackets was a different animal. Rackets was dealing with the guys that you were just talking about. In addition to every other kind of racket that you could possibly imagine. I started several different units in the office that had never been started before. The sex trafficking unit, we started a unit that prosecuted just sex traffickers. We started a unit that at that time it was during the Obama years where there was a lot of problems with banks lending money to on mortgages and people not being able to pay their mortgage, etc. And a lot of homes were being stolen out from under individuals. So we had a mortgage fraud unit as well. We had an environmental crimes unit. So I like to say that the rackets division was a place where even if they didn't have a crime didn't have a particular location to go to, they would send it to us. And what happened is something that clearly has defined my second stint in the DA's office forever, and that is an official corruption investigation that I did for about 6 or 7 years of my time there, and it started out very innocently, and blew up to the point where at the end of it, I had convicted and jailed. I had convicted 3 Supreme Court judges, jailed 2 of them. I convicted the head of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn, who was the 3rd ranking Democrat in the state. I convicted another political official. I convicted I did the investigation into 2 very, very corrupt New York City police officers who had retired. They became known as the Mafia Cops. And at the end of that stint, I did a case that boggled my mind, Rob. I got to tell you, it was a case involving a dental surgeon who had lost his license, and to make sure that he was making a lot of money as a dental surgeon, and when he lost his license because he was addicted to drugs and actually fell asleep in the middle of a surgical procedure. He decided that he was going to go into the business of harvesting bone and tissue from cadavers. And when he couldn't get permission from family members to take the bone and tissue, which would be repurposed and used in operations across the country, he decided to cut deals with funeral directors and have at the bodies before they were either buried or cremated, and without the permission of the family members. And the one case that really kind of broke this, as far as the press was concerned, was one of your countrymen, Alistair Cook, was one of the victims. His daughter had him, after he died, had him cremated, and he was cremated after this so-called dentist had taken all of his bone and tissue. Now, the guy was like 90 something years old when he died, or late 80s. And what bone, or how bone would be valuable to somebody or to a doctor of someone that age is beyond me, but he didn't care. And then the body was cremated, so there was no evidence of it. And when we found all of the records of the people that he had harvested bone and tissue from, we found Alistair Cook, and we went to talk to his daughter, who lived in Manhattan. And when we told her what was going on, she said, I knew there was something going on, because when I spread my father's ashes after he was cremated, they were like baby powder. There was no bone chips, there was nothing there. And she said, I knew something was up. I didn't know what it was. And then we solved that for her. So that was kind of the last thing that I did at the DA's office. It was done at that point. I had, I had helped the DA in terms of his reelection. We didn't win, and I decided to leave. And then I started my second career, and that was to write about all of the adventures, my investigations, my trials, my my ups and downs, so to speak, as a prosecutor and an attorney. And I've just finished my seventh book, and I'm about to start my eighth. So that pretty much sums it up. If you want more, you could ask specifically, but it's pretty much who I am. And I'm now married and live in a different part of the city, but I still am in New York, and I still am a Brooklynite, and will be until they put me into the grave. So I love the borough, and I write about the borough now. It's the subject of I'm sorry, not the subject, the site of all of my, particularly the crime novels that I've written, all take place in Brooklyn. So
All of the cases that you, excuse me, go into detail of there, you've written books on or are included in your books, which we'll speak about shortly. So what did your grandparents and parents do for a living then when they came over? Because your grandparents came over at a time where Italians and the Irish were particularly detested, weren't they? And they got bottom of the rung jobs.
correct.
So what? And it wasn't
Correct.
New York City wasn't, despite Italians and other ethnicities and other countries coming over to the States, coming over to New York, thought it was paved with gold, where in fact they found something quite different.
Oh yeah.
What was the story of your grandparents? I'm fascinated to know that.
Well, my grandfather, my two grandfathers, my father's mom never got here and died very quickly. My mother's mother and father, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather came here before he brought his wife and one of his daughters, who was my aunt. He sent for them after he had come here and gotten settled. He was a cobbler. He opened up his own business. Very, very interesting where they settled, and it turned out to be a boon to his business. We lived, and I wound up, when I was born, living on the same block that my parents, my mother, settled in and was born and raised on. On that block was a very big hospital complex. So my grandfather had a shoemaker shop right, I would say probably, maybe 100 yards from the hospital. So he had a built-in clientele with doctors and nurses and patients, etc. So he had a very, very good and thriving business. Um, it was it was the kind of place that I loved hanging out in, even when I was a kid. He taught me how to shine shoes, and I used to shine shoes for him. And I would mind this. I would watch the store if he had to go off on and do some business elsewhere, and I would be able to, to give the customers their shoes, collect the money, etc. So that's what he did until he passed away. He was a big smoker, by the way, and finally succumbed to lung cancer. My grandmother, his wife, was just a homemaker. She raised three children: my mother, my aunt, who was the lady who came over with her when she came from Italy. My aunt was born in Italy, and my uncle. My mother went to high school here, never went to college. My aunt never went to college, only high school. My uncle, their brother, um, after he graduated from high school, he went to music school. He became a musician, and was a drummer, played in all kinds of bands, and did very, very well for himself before he got a job later on in life at the New York Stock Exchange. So she stayed home. My grandmother. She took care of the house. And I have to tell you, Rob, and I've read a lot of things close to this, but I never thought that I would. I thought that I was unique. My grandmother, this old Italian lady, who spoke broken English, and never wanted me to speak to her in Italian, the little Italian that I knew, because she wanted to learn English, was like my best friend. I mean, she was such a cool lady. And as I was growing up, when my grandfather died, my parents had me live with my grandmother, and I lived with her in an apartment not that far next door to where my parents lived and where I grew up. And she was cool. When I went to high school, I was in a band, and when we would play gigs, some of the guys in the band would come over and sleep at her apartment. She would cook for us, and she was just a terrific lady. And I always said to her, I said, Grandma, if I had the money, I would make sure that when I grew up, I would open up a restaurant and you would be the chef. She was a magnificent cook, Rob. Magnificent cook. Tomato sauce was just absolutely tremendous. But ask her for a recipe. I don't know. In the broken English, I do a little of this, a little of that, that kind of thing. Um, so she was my just a wonderful lady. When she passed away, I really missed her. It was a devastating time for me. My father's father came over and was a tailor. He was a tailor in Italy. He was a tailor here in the United States. But he also did he kind of diversified. He opened up also a music store. He was a musician. I don't remember what he played, however. And my father studied music and became was also a musician. He was a saxophone player, played the clarinet, played the piano. My father was very talented in many different areas. And so my grandfather was did the tailor work. They had like 6 or 7 kids, and my father didn't go to college, went to high school, ultimately got a GED, but opened up his own business, went to the war, fought in World War II. After the war, when he came back, he got involved in a business, a jewelry kind of business called enameling. And what it is he worked for an individual who would take various pieces of jewelry and put the color into the piece of jewelry, and then he opened up his own business, and he wound up becoming probably, I think he might have been the only enameler in New York City, quite frankly. And he used to do all of the police department badges and fire department badges and any kind of badge that you could possibly think of that had color in it. And he had a very lucrative business. He did work for people across the country, and so his, and he had the work ethic that he passed along to me. And when I became an attorney and went to work at the DA's office, well, I'll never forget this. One of the only things he said to me in terms of kind of instruction was, he said, Michael, always do the right thing, and you never have to worry about anybody, question. So, so that's my background. That's where I came from, and the work ethic. And my mom was a housewife as well. She was at home. She worked when she was in her early years. During the war, she worked, but when she got after the war, she got married to my father, and she became raised myself and my sister in that on that Brooklyn street that we all kind of settled on. So that's my the nutshell, my family in a nutshell.
Was it coincidence that your grandparents came over in the 20s at the same time of the rise of Benito Mussolini in Italy?
I can't give you a definitive answer, but I do know this, that when I got older and began to, and I studied history and got to know the history of the war and Mussolini and Hitler, I did ask questions about Mussolini and my grandmother in particular, and she was always, the thing that I remember is that she was fearful of what she always used to call the brown shirts. Mm. And when she was a young girl, and then when she was older and she got married, the brown shirts were in control, and in my opinion, they left for a couple of reasons. One, you hit it before, that everybody thought that America was, the streets were lined with gold, but they also came over because I really truly believe that they thought that the Italy that they knew when they were growing up pre-Mussolini was not going to be the Italy that was the Italy after Mussolini took power. But so that's really my only recollection of her talking about, her days in Italy before she came to the United States. But clearly the brown shirt stuck in her head because she always used to talk about it. And if there was anything in the United States that kind of was similar to the way that she remembered, the quote unquote brown shirts, and of course talking about the fascists in Italy, she would raise it. She says, she would have this again in that broken English. It's like the brown shirts, and that's all I can remember about her with the Mussolini, and my grandfather never really spoke to me about it. Although my grandfather was in World War One. My grandfather fought in World War One before he came to the United States. In fact, I have a sword that was part of his uniform. I still have it. It's downstairs in my bedroom. I have it in a place that's away from other people. But it was a sword from his uniform that he took with him when he came to the United States, and it was in my grandmother's home. And then when we moved, my parents and myself and my sister moved out of Brooklyn and moved to Queens, and we took my grandmother with us. She was alone, so she lived with us in the house in Queens. And among the things that she had accumulated and brought with her was this sword, which I one day came upon in my father's workroom, which he had it hidden somewhere, and I found it, and I have had it ever since. So it's it I now wish that I had done a lot more talking and a lot more interviewing, because there are so many people who are interested in this time of our history, and that like you, and if I had the answers, I would. I really wish I had talked a lot more to her about it, but I didn't. So, but I got the sense that Italy they were happy to get out at that point. But I got to tell you this, Rob, as far long as I can remember, every couple of years, both her and my grandfather got on a ship and went back home, spent a month and a half in the summertime in their hometown, and so they never lost their connection to the homeland, but they were very, very happy in the United States. They thrived, and it was good. It was good.
It resonates with me when you say you wish you asked more questions, because my gran was in London when the German bombings of the big cities in the UK, and she told me some stories off her own back, but I never really dived into it. Where obviously in hindsight it would have been amazing to do that. And the same with your granddad in World War One. Wow, he would have had some amazing stories.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I always find it's interesting, so in your case, in your family, your grandparents emigrate, and then a few years later they're actually at war with the country that they grew up and loved.
Yep.
And you said your father fought in the Second World War.
Yes.
How did they rationalize that? Were they very much pro-American, or were they in between, or were they pro-Mussolini?
That I can answer. There's no doubt that they were Americans at that point. They were citizens. They had become citizens, and they were the fighting between the United States, Germany, Italy. There was no doubt that they were on the American side, and and the idea that Mussolini was not someone who they were in love with at any point, made it easier for them. My uncle, their son, also went overseas. My father was overseas, and it was not. There was not a single time that I have ever heard a word that they disagreed with. The idea that America had to go into the war. None whatsoever. They were patriots, and it was something that they were very, very proud of, that their son and their then soon to be son-in-law had fought for America, and that was it. And they also, in addition to them, there were a lot of other cousins and relatives who emigrated at the same time and had opened up businesses in our neighborhood, etc. And And the men who of fighting age at that point, who my father and my uncle knew were Italian, first generation Italians, or second generation Italians, I guess. Um, fought in the war, fought in the war with no problems at all, and no, never a question. So
Fascinating.
yeah,
So, did you have a good growing up in Brooklyn?
I
Happy?
did. I did. Very happy. Very happy. I went to grammar school. I lived in a place that's now called Prospect Heights. When I was growing up, it was we called it Bedford Stuyvesant, which is a tough area to grow up in. I grew up and went to Catholic grammar school, not that far from my home. I walked to school every day. Um, Walked back. At that time, there was a lunch break, and you'd walk home and have lunch in your own apartment. And I walked back, and I went to high school, not that far away. I went to Catholic high school, a place called Bishop Loughlin Memorial High School, and took a bus to go to school there. And then after high school, I went to college in Brooklyn. I went to St. John's University. They had a campus in Brooklyn, which is where they started. Before they moved out to a big campus out here in Queens. And I went to St. John's and did 4 years at St. John's. And the first time I ventured out of that Catholic school kind of atmosphere was when I went to law school. I went to law school at the time, it was a first year law school out on Long Island called Hofstra University. And I went to their law school. So, but yeah, I grew up at a time when I grew up, I had a great time. I had lots of friends. We played ball all the time in the street. You know, there was never. I think the only time I ever played in an organized situation was when I tried out for a couple of little league teams or when I got older, high school teams. But I played all kinds of ball, stick ball and touch football and basketball, and we made up our own games as well. You know, games that didn't necessarily involve athletics, and it was terrific. I had a great number of friends, and the same thing when I went to high school. I was the I played. I was on the bowling team in high school. I did whatever I could to make friends, and I did. I made lots of friends, and I played, and then when I went to college, I was the president. I came in and got involved with a fraternity, and I was elected president of the fraternity in my first year. So I was a freshman, and I was in charge of the head of the fraternity, and I became also the athletic director, the intramural athletic director for St. John's for that school, and I ran the intramural. That means clubs and fraternities and groups playing against each other in softball and touch football and basketball, etc. And I was in charge of all of that, so I got to know a lot of people in college as well. And then I left the womb and went to law school, and it was a completely different, a totally different environment. You know, different way of learning, different way of I had to find new friends, and I did. And we had a small study group which helped me get through law school, and so I have to say that I had a terrific life. I had a terrific growing up.
Were your parents pleased that you went down the route you went?
They were the day that my uncle, my mother's sister's husband, was an attorney. And he was a guy that used to take me and my cousin, his son, all over the place, all over the United States in the summertime. My parents would rent a summer house and down on the Jersey Shore on the beach for 2 weeks. My father took time off from his work. It was a time when all of the people in that industry, the jewelry industry, would take off. So I had those 2 weeks there, and then my uncle Louis, took myself, my cousin, and his wife, and we traveled all over the eastern seaboard, up into Canada, into Montreal, into Quebec, and then down to through the south and into Florida, ultimately winding up in Miami Beach, spending a week or so in Miami Beach, and then finding our way back. All driven, all cars. And I got to tell you this, Rob. What really struck me, I'll never forget this, is in the '60s, sort of the early to mid '60s, when we were driving. My uncle said to me, one, we finished the vacation, and we were talking one day, and he said, Michael, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do this next year. And I said, why? What's the matter? He says, well, I've got a New York license plate on my car. The civil rights movement was full and going full bore at that point, and they did not look kindly on Northerners, through driving through North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, etc. I remember more than once stopping at a gas station where there would be two water fountains, whites and coloreds. There would be two bathrooms. There would be I went to for snacks or lunch in small towns, and there was an entrance for white people and an entrance for black people, and it was a very eye-opening experience. I had never experienced that. I went to school. I lived in a neighborhood that was totally integrated. We had black people. We had Hispanics. We had whites. We had whites from all over Europe. We had Italians. We had Irish. We had Germans. It was very, very integrated. My high school, the grammar school and high school, were totally integrated. I had black friends I played ball with all the time. And so when I got to when we did this and took this trip down south, and as the years went on, you could see that there was more and more tension happening. And my uncle pointed it out to me. And I was now at this point, I was in high school and obviously starting to study what was going on. And I recognized it. And it was sad because we stopped going down to Miami Beach. It was great. It was great. You get down there. We would have go to the beach, go to the pool. I mean, I lived in a 4-story kind of, I don't want to say tenement, but it was still a 4-story apartment building. There was no pool. There was nothing, that was like that. You had to go to Coney Island, in order to go to the beach, and get on a train, a subway, and go out, for an hour on a subway to get to Coney Island. So the trip down to Jersey, first of all, was magnificent. And then to do the idea of going down south was fantastic. And I also loved going up to Canada. I really liked Montreal. I liked Quebec. I liked, we went as far west as Ottawa, and it was terrific. So the my parents were very pleased at the way that I grew up. And when I told them that I had made law school, it was they were, I could tell that they were just so pleased. It was unbelievable. It was, they always said, that you need to grow up and become a lawyer like your uncle, and that kind of thing. And I did. He was my my mentor, and I wanted to be like him. And so when I got to do what I wanted to do and got into law school, it was celebration time in my house.
No, I bet. So organised crime. I'm assuming living in Brooklyn, there was organised crime. I don't know about all around you, maybe. Can you delve into that? Like when did you? What era? Sorry, what era did you grow up in? Because that's my way of trying to get your age, but I'm too embarrassed to ask you it. So what eras did you go?
I'm 75. I was born in 1949. I went to I did, obviously during the 50s. I was in grammar school. I got into high school in the I got into high school in '62. Graduated in '66. '62. The biggest thing for us was, the British invasion, the music invasion, and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And I mean, I played in a band in high school, and it was tremendous. So I'm sorry, I lost your question. What? Oh, organized crime.
Organized crime growing up.
So let me tell you, it was around. Okay, I grew up in an area where a portion of the area had organized crime people living, not necessarily the idea of the social clubs and and what what you see on various movies, etc. But they were there. They were there. They're not that far away. But it was not like areas like Bensonhurst or Gravesend, which is South Brooklyn, where the mafia, or Carroll Gardens, where I started to live later, went to live later. But it was there, and I'll tell you how I knew, because my parents had they were relatives who were into gambling, and not loan sharking, but gambling and taking bets, etc. And my parents every once in a while would talk about somebody or someone who they knew, a relative, and they never really made a big deal about it. It was like they didn't want me to know anything about that stuff. They didn't want any of us, my cousin, my sister, etc. But they were there, and I'll tell you a very quick story about what I'm talking about. My mom and my aunt were very, very big contributors, and not contributors, I shouldn't say that. They were very interested in helping out a particular order of nuns in our parish. They were called the Trinitarian nuns. They were not teachers. They were an order of who did charity work for lots of different organizations, lots of different people, and in lots of different ways. And my aunt, my mother and my aunt got involved with helping them in fundraising and doing all kinds of things to help them out. And there was a lady who belonged to the group as well, who they became very good friends with. And her name was Ray Eppolito. And Ray, I got to know her. I got to know her son, who was around my age, maybe a little bit younger. And we used to hang out together, and we'd go to different kind of events with them, and they became very good friends with our family. And I remember that my aunt and my mother talking about Ray's husband and his brothers and his father. And how do I remember? I remember because they said in so many words that he was not like his relatives. I had really no idea what they were talking about until time went on, and I got to realize and got to know more about the whole mafia lifestyle, that they were mafiosi. And this gentleman, his family was immersed in it, was not. And in fact, he not changed his name, but varied his name from Eppolito to Ippolito. And here's the connection. When I did the Mafia Cops case, well, actually before that, when I was working at the police, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before. When I left the DA's office the first time, I went to work at the police department, and I became the head of I think I mentioned this, the head of their prosecution unit. And I learned about a detective, who everybody knew was corrupt, and they couldn't ever get him. He was a mob guy, they said. His family was mob connected. Well, his family was the Eppolito. His name was Eppolito. The guy that I knew was Ippolito, but that's because he changed his name to distance himself from his family. So when I started the investigation into the Mafia Cops, and Louis Eppolito was one of the Mafia Cops, one day it kind of just dawned on me that, oh my God, this is the son of Ray, this woman, Ray's husband's brother, or what, etc. And I read his book. He wrote a book called Mafia Cop. And when I read the book, it was all laid out for me. Now, they lived about a block and a half away from me. And they lived with, there was a whole group of people who lived in this area. And they were small-time mafiosi, at least as far as I could tell. Until I got to know more about it and realized that this guy Eppolito was this detective was a corrupt guy and working for the mob, and had worked for the mob for a very, very long time. So to answer your question, I didn't live in the midst of the mafia in Brooklyn at that time. When I went to college, I I was in a fraternity, and we had a fraternity house out in Bay Ridge, which was in the midst of mafiosi land. And so I was around it a lot when I was growing up, not where I lived necessarily, but where I hung out and where my friends hung out.
We'll keep on, now you've mentioned it, to the Mafia Cops. But just quickly, was there any notable names that you came across in your youth? So before you started in the Justice Department working for the government, was there any notable
No,
names?
not that. I mean, you read. I wasn't completely illiterate. I read the newspapers, and I knew that there was, it was a Carlo Gambino, and I knew about his ilk, and Carmine Galante, and people of that nature. I knew the names, and people would talk, and I would hear names, and I would hear other guys in the neighborhood talk and about various things, but I never really. It wasn't like I knew, like, John Gotti or Sammy Gravano. It wasn't like that. I didn't have anybody of that ilk in the neighborhood. I just knew the names because I started to become familiar and also become interested in the whole idea. As I said, I wanted to go to when I went to law school. I wanted to become a criminal lawyer, and I paid attention, to that stuff.
So there was two reasons from what I gather what you just said. Was one, that your parents shielded you from that
Yes,
type of activity, and
without a
two,
doubt.
there wasn't a mega amount of it around your growing up. So
Correct.
those for two reasons. But no, that's cool. So the Mafia Cops, you mentioned the Mafia Cops. I actually interviewed a ex NYPD detective by the name of Vic Ferrari, who we did a segment on the Mafia Cops. He was around when the Mafia Cop situation happened.
Yeah.
I think he wasn't anywhere near as involved in it as what you were. But could you tell the story? I think that's fascinating. The story of your dealings with the Mafia Cops,
Yeah.
please.
As I said, I started out knowing about Louis Eppolito when I was what they call the department advocate. That was the chief prosecutor in the DA's office. I'm sorry, the new NYPD. That's where I heard about him, and I worked with internal affairs a lot, and so I knew about him. I knew about uh, his what people believed he was involved in at that point, and they believed it because of his background, of where he came from, and who his family was, etc. So it was a matter of the people in the PD in internal affairs who always looked for an opening to try to get an investigation going with this guy, and they thought they had him at one point, and it didn't turn out to be that to be very successful. So it was allowed to retire. He and Stephen Caracappa, who was his partner in various locations in the police department, but also was his partner in crime. They were the two mafia cops, the two who I wrote the book about. And and so I kind of, I left that work and went to my own practice. And then from there, I went to the DA's office again. And the only way I knew Eppolito again was I read his book. It was called Mafia Cop, and I was interested because I was interested in the subject, and I got to know a little bit more about him, and what he said was an unfair characterization of him as a guy who was as a mafia cop because his family was. He said I had nothing to do with my family, and excuse my French here, but it was total bullshit, bro. Total bullshit. He was immersed in this stuff. And how do I know that? Because I did the investigation later on and immersed myself into his background and into his history. And so years went on, and I got to know a detective who who came to me with another completely other case. It was a homicide case that he was asked to handle as a result of. It's a long story, but we had a new mayor in New York at one point, a guy by the name of David Dinkins, and Dinkins, when he was elected, named Ray Kelly as his police commissioner, and they went around to various precincts throughout the city essentially speaking to precinct community groups, precinct the cops, etc., and saying it's a new, it's a new time, new world. We're here. We want to hear what you have to say. We want to know if there's anything that you need us to take care of. And in one location in Bay Ridge, this woman raised her hand and said, "Yeah, there is something. My son was killed several years ago, and it remains unsolved. My son was this terrific kid who was worked in a stock exchange. He was the all American boy in that neighborhood. Played baseball, and everybody loved him. And he was trying to sell his car one day, and he went out because he had potential buyers, and never came home. And they found him dead next to his car. It's never been solved. So Ray Kelly listened and said, okay, we're going to take a new look at it, and assigned person who became my very, very good friend, Tommy Dades, and a guy named Mike Galletta, another detective. And they were assigned to investigate this case and bring the bad guy to justice, the bad guys to justice. And so that's how I got to know Tommy. I got to know him because I got this case, and we were able to do exactly what this woman wanted us to do, to figure out who did this, why it was done. She didn't like the reason as to why her son was killed. It turns out he wasn't the all-American boy that she thought he was. He was actually a drug dealer. And what he was doing was selling drugs in a territory that belonged to two mafia figures. And they told him to stop, and he basically said no. And they said, okay, well, we're going to kill you. And they did. So we ultimately found that out because Tommy Dades worked at this like a madman. And then, however, I got to be very, very candid, we caught a break. The guy gets arrested for something totally out, not even close to what I'm talking about. And when he's in the precinct cell, the detective bureau cell, now this case involving the death of this young boy had been going on for a long time, over a year, maybe longer than that. He said he was making fun of the cops that arrested him and laughing at them and saying, when is one of you guys going to arrest? And he points to a picture, a police sketch of the supposed killer of this young boy, which was made back when the incident occurred. He said, when are you guys going to catch Joe Beef? That was his street name. Cops said, what? You know who did that? Anyway, make a long story short, he became my star witness. One witness. He knew who it was. He knew why it was done. As I told you what the reason was. He knew there were two killers. And Tommy Dades comes to me. He didn't know me from a hole in the wall. Just came to me and he said, I want to introduce myself. I've heard good things about you. I got this case. You want to get involved with me? And I never turned anything down like that. I was the kind of guy who wanted to do everything. And I said, sure, what do you got? And he told me. I said, Tommy, we got one witness, this horrible guy. We're going to go do a murder case based on this. He said, Mike, I promise you, if you can get an indictment with this one witness, I will get you more and we'll make this case better. And we did. And we convicted them, and they've gone away to jail. Two organized crime guys who were Gambino guys who were pissed off because this guy, Checkett was the name of the deceased, Chester Checkett, was selling drugs on their turf. And that was the reason. So Tommy and I now became good friends. And anytime he had a tough case, he would come to me. So we'd laugh at each other. He says, you were my DA. And I say, yeah, and you were my detective, because I would go to him if I had situations. So all these years pass. He comes to me and he says, listen, I got this information about Eppolito. You want in? You want to open up this case? The Eppolito Caracappa Mafia Cops case had been closed for years, 10, maybe 12 years. When I say closed, this is why. They had an informant, a guy by the name of Gaspipe Casso, you may have heard of. He was He was the head. Was the second in command in the Lucchese family. Casso, when he became a government informant, when he was debriefed, gave up the Mafia Cops and said, "I had these two cops on my payroll. They've been doing killings for me. They've been doing things for me." And the government, because Casso, they didn't like Casso because Casso was a guy that almost undermined their conviction of John Gotti. They didn't want to give him any play on what he told. So they did nothing. And it sat there for 10 years until Tommy got this little bit of information from the mother of one of the people who was involved in an attempted murder on Gaspipe Casso. His name was Jimmy Heidel. And his mother knew Tommy because Tommy was doing an investigation into the death of her other son, a guy named Frankie Heidel. And she finally came to him and said, I got a piece of information. And she gave him a piece of information about the case, about the Mafia Cops coming to her house looking for the son who was killed. And we opened up an investigation.
Didn't she read the book? Sorry to interrupt. Was that the lady who read the book?
What she did was they came to her house, and after a while, she bought the Mafia Cop book that was written by Eppolito and opened it up, and there were pictures in the center of the book. And there's a picture of Eppolito and Caracappa, the two guys together. And she said, "Oh, man, that's them." Well, she went to the feds with the information. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. She went to other places, and they did nothing about it. And she let it kind of die until one day she said to Tommy, "I just had enough. I'm going to tell you this." And she told him. And that's how we started the investigation. And what they were doing is, as you probably know, they had originally begun working for a guy from the Gambino family, who was a relative of Eppolito. And they were working for the Gambinos. They were doing what they did for the Lucchese's, which is to tip them off to informants, tip them off to cases. They would do favors for them, that kind of thing, until the Gambinos killed someone who was very close to Eppolito, and he didn't want to have anything to do with them anymore. There was a go-between, a guy who was working with the Mafia Cops and the Gambinos, who now got involved with Gaspipe Casso. His name is Bert Kaplan. And Casso was looking for that same kind of information. And Kaplan said, "Well, I've got the perfect guys for you." And they set it up with Gaspipe, and he did that for years with them, paying them off to kill people, to tip off information, et cetera, et cetera. The way that it got kicked off for us in terms of an investigation and the way things kind of blossomed was the story of Gaspipe and how he was the attempted assassination on Gaspipe. And the reason for that is he had tried to kill John Gotti unsuccessfully, and Gotti went after him again, went after him. They went to kill him unsuccessfully, and he made it his business to find out the names of everybody in the car that pulled up alongside of him that shot in his car. And one of them was this guy, Jimmy Heidel. And Jimmy Heidel, finally, the Mafia Cops found him, picked him up, brought him to Gaspipe. He tortured him and got all the names of the other people. And then they buried him in a construction location that was then paved over, and apartment buildings were built on top. So that's how Tommy got involved. And he got involved with the brother because the brother was killed, but he got to know Mrs. Heidel that way. And she became the impetus to starting the case. And we worked it. And finally, I had talked to Gaspipe. I had talked to Gaspipe's lawyer because I knew that we needed something in order to break this case open. And I thought if I could turn Gaspipe, who was doing 17 life sentences, that I could now break the case open. The feds wouldn't give Gaspipe any deal at all, and he was doing federal time. So they moved on. We moved on. And we were continuing the investigation until one day I get notice that the feds basically had stolen the case from us. They had made a deal with somebody else, with this guy Kaplan, and then went ahead and prosecuted the case, and ultimately convicted the two guys that were supposed to be convicted, get the two cops. But it left a bad taste in all of our mouths. The feds did something that doesn't surprise me because that's just the way federal attorneys are and were back then. And but it was a case that that quite frankly I will never forget. And it turns out that these two guys were. I mean, when we broke open the case and looked into everything, it turns out that they were working and doing this business for the mafia for a very long time, longer than we had even thought. And we found recently we sold the rights to the book that we wrote, Tommy and I, again to Hollywood, and we got some other people involved, detectives who were dealing with them before our case started. And it turns out that there were other cases that they were involved in terms of murders and setting up murders, etc., that were going to be part of this TV show that never got off the ground. But so that was that's the Mafia Cops case, and Tommy and I have stayed close ever since. We did a lot of cases together, a lot of cold cases, cases that were sitting around not being solved. And he's a dogged detective, and he knew what I was about, and we did some great work together.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Right, the name of your book is Friends of the Family Inside the Story of the Mafia Cops Case. I'll
That's
put a
book number.
link.
Correct.
Sorry? That's
Yep,
the one? Oh, good, yeah.
that's the first one. That's about the Mafia Cops case. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get
Yeah.
on to the others, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I'll put a link in the description box below. I just want to talk to you about the FBI. One of my latest interviews was with a Miami detective Ramesh Nyberg, who ended up on a cold case which involved hunting Whitey Bulger, and he met all of the Winter Hill. Well, I say a lot of the Winter Hill gang, interviewed them, spent time with them, etc. And you probably know what's coming now. He also met John Connolly, and he found from the absolute get-go of this case that the FBI behaved terribly, and he had some very choice words for the FBI. What's your view on the FBI?
Well, you got another 3 hours, 4 hours, because one of the cases that I did, and it's mentioned. I didn't write a great deal of it because ultimately the FBI agent who I arrested and indicted for 4 murders for doing what the Mafia Cops did for one particular Mafia individual. I had to dismiss the case because a witness fell apart and we wound up dismissing it. So I'm not even going to mention his name. But what I found in the investigation of those cases and of that FBI agent was, let's just say that nothing that's happening today surprises me with the FBI, that they are a force and they believe they are a government unto themselves. And that's not every FBI agent, but I'm talking about the hierarchy and others that, that kind of lead these packs and packs of agents. There were cases where we were working on them in Brooklyn and detectives were working on them, and there would be a hint of a federal connection. Feds would come in and steal the case and take credit for it. The investigation into the Mafia Cops case is a perfect example of it. It wasn't the FBI; it was the federal U.S. Attorney's Office who stole the case from under us, and it was a federal agency, the Drug Enforcement Administration, who was instrumental in putting together a section of it when these guys moved to Las Vegas. But I don't. I had another experience with an FBI agent. I'll tell you, it's another one of the cases I did with Tom. We're doing it. It's a homicide case, and it was an important case. It was a cold case, and what happened is there was a witness who was sitting in a car with the guy that I was going to indict or had indicted, and he reached over, the guy in the back seat reached over as they were driving, and he wound up shooting and killing his father. Killed his own father, who was a wise guy as well. We had him for other things. And,
who was that?
What's his name?
Can you remember his name?
I can, but I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna get. He's out now. He's done his time. I really don't want to get into his name. And so we're in. I found out that this about this particular witness who was a government witness. He had turned, and Tommy had arranged for us to go interview him at the federal courthouse in Manhattan. And when we get to the courthouse, in the interview room is this FBI agent. And I said to him, I said, what the fuck are you doing here? He goes, oh, well, you know, so-and-so is my informant, etc. He's got nothing to say to you. I said, what? I know exactly what he has to say to me. He's got information that will put the gun in this guy's hand, killing his own father, and I have other information, and I have other cases that he was involved in. This is a very important witness, and I was told he was willing to cooperate with us, which Tommy said to me afterwards. We left the room, and he said, that mother effer. He said he knew that I was interested. He knew that that Kai had given us permission to come and talk to him. He was going to talk to me, and he put the kibosh on. So this is a law enforcement agent who is now working against law enforcement people. And it wasn't a surprise to me at all. When we were doing the case involving the FBI agent as the killer, or at least I indicted him for 4 murders. He had best information, and which made him made him acting in concert with the murders. But he was working with a Colombo guy named Scarpa, Greg Scarpa. And when we went down to Washington to talk to the counsel, who's now a federal judge for the FBI, to let him know what we were doing, what we needed help, etc., and we were hoping to get cooperation, etc. Rob, she made that visit as unfriendly and as Tommy got up and walked out in a meeting because they were not cooperative at all. All during the investigation, the U.S. attorney and the federal and the FBI were uncooperative with us during the investigation of this particular FBI agent. We were stymied in a lot of places. We were able to turn a couple of FBI agents who knew about this guy and what he was doing and had been doing back when he was doing it, testified for us at the at trial. So it's not everybody, but overall, it's an organization that I don't trust. I think that the leadership is very, very political, and that it's which way is the wind blowing politics wise, and that's the way we'll go. And what has happened over the last years since Trump and since all of these investigations and what they have done and what we know what they have done or didn't do is just kind of ratified what I knew back in the days that I was doing these investigations. So I really don't have any use for the hierarchy of the FBI.
So were you on the case of Scarpa, the FBI turned dodgy guy for Scarpa?
Was I on the case? No.
Yeah, were you involved in it?
No, by the time I did the case involving the FBI agent, Scarpa was dead.
I mean the FBI agent. Were you involved with the FBI agent who was helping Scarpa out?
It was my case.
You were?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Oh. I indicted him 4 times for 4 separate murders. Absolutely. And I had Scarpa's son came up and helped us, and
just come out of prison.
We took him out of AdMax, and the maximum security prison in the Colorado mountains. That's another funny story. He came out after being in solitary confinement for that's where they keep him, 23 in the cell, and then an hour out in another cell where you can walk around. He came out, and when the detectives from my office brought him to the airport and put him on a plane, he had no idea what cell phones were. He had never had, when they got on the plane, they asked him if he wanted a soda. He hadn't had a soda in like 15 years. It was like it was mind-boggling for this guy. And he was Scarpa's son. And I got to know him very well, Gregory. And when I talked to him about his father and what was going on, he said to me that he said, your dad taught you probably how to play baseball and that kind of thing. He said, my dad taught me how to kill people. And he said, my dad taught me that the one thing you have to do is after you shoot somebody, you got to go up to them and put the gun behind their ear and pull the trigger. That was, what needed to be done. So Gregory, yeah, I was involved in that investigation. I did it. It was me and Tommy and other people. We turned several guys who were in witness protection, found them. I went. It was a very, very long, extensive investigation, and it ended because of a reporter who, in the middle of the trial, I'm on trial, actually in the courtroom, when a guy taps me on the shoulder, it was a lawyer, and says, after you're done, I need to speak to you. He was representing two reporters who said they had a piece of information from 10 years before that indicated that my star witness thought that the defendant was innocent. And the DA didn't want me to go forward any longer, and we pulled the plug on the case. But I had him. And later on he appears on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, the FBI agent, and basically is confronted with, did you help, the mob? And he admitted it. He admitted that he did. Of course, he didn't admit that he was involved in murders, but he did admit that, he had gotten information from the mob, and that he was working this monster. So,
do you think he was involved in murders?
The FBI agent shooting?
Yeah.
No, I never had that information. No. It was information in which he passed. It was evidence of him passing information to Scarpa that so and so was testifying against you, was going to testify against you, that kind of thing, and they disappeared. So
he was aiding Scarpa.
Oh, yeah. In New York, that's the same thing as pulling the trigger.
Yeah, Greg Scarpa Jr. has been done an interview or two on YouTube because he's out.
Who's
he's
that?
out now, isn't he?
Scarpa Jr.
Greg. Yeah.
Yeah,
Scarpa
Gregory.
Jr.
Yeah. Gregory,
what was he like?
He was a very gregarious, very talkative, very upbeat guy. In fact, when he walked into the office the very first day, I introduced myself, and he said, Mike, if I call you Mike. I said, yeah. He said, Mike, I got to tell you, Gaspipe Casso, who's my cellmate, not my cellmate, my neighbor in AdMax, wants you to go talk to him. That's how I got to talk to Gaspipe. I made an appointment after I finished the case and went down and spoke to Gaspipe twice he was in a federal hospital down in North Carolina. And I spoke to him, interviewed him, gave me information, talked to me about the case, etc. So Gregory was cool. We treated him very well. He helped us a lot, and I would have his, we let him visit with his mother and his sister, and and things of that nature when he was in the office, and so he helped us a great deal. And I got to tell you, the day that he went back to AdMax, when we sent him back, got people in the office who got to know him, other assistant DAs and some of the staff. We wound up taking pictures with him. It's it's posing, and that was the kind of relationship we wound up having. He was with me for a year. So,
you still got the photos?
Say again?
Have you still got any? Yeah.
I don't think I do. I may have them somewhere. I don't know. I may have them somewhere. I don't think I have. I don't remember exactly if I do. I gotta look.
Well, if you find any, can you send them over to me? Take a screenshot of them. That'd be great. Thank you. You say the FBI, the lady who was what title was the lady
counsel.
who?
She was counsel.
Why was she rude to you? Why was she blocking your investigation?
Because she didn't want us to. Why? Because we were looking to lock up a former FBI agent who was supposedly one of their stars. We were looking to lock him up for murder. So, they weren't going to give us any help. they pretended, oh yeah, don't worry, we'll have this, and of course you get something and it turns out to be redacted to the point where you can't even read what it is. It was a joke, and it was so they were so rude is a good word to use. That I told you, Tommy walked out. He said, he said to me later, he said, if I stayed in there, I would have gotten us all into trouble. He said, because I couldn't stand listening to what she was saying to us. We had FBI agents who were willing and did testify for us. But those guys were not looked upon as being, worthy of having support from the bureau that they worked for.
So the Bureau prevented justice being done.
Tried to prevent it. We did it. We indicted him without their help, with these two FBI agents, informants, with witnesses. So we did it. But they certainly didn't make it easy for us, and it would have been a lot easier if we had their assistance. There was an FBI, a U.S. attorney who we were looking for, who had left the U.S. Attorney's office. She had moved to the Midwest somewhere. It turns out she was in Chicago, and she had the whole thing. She knew exactly what these guys. Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. I'm confusing the cases. That was the Mafia Cops case. I'm sorry. It was that was different. But they did not help us. They did not help us. So I was able to convince the retired guys, the guys who did testify for us, to come forward, and they knew back then that he was pulling crap. So it was interesting. I learned a lot about him, about Scarpa, and before the FBI agent I was investigating got involved, he was being handled by a different FBI agent, a different guy. And the whole story about him going down to Mississippi to help the FBI solve the murders of the students in Mississippi. And his wife, Linda, told me the whole story. She was with him, and the whole thing about what the hotel they stayed in, and what the atmosphere was like, etc. So it's very interesting. I learned a lot of mob history as a result of being with her.
What was she? So you met Linda Scarpa. What was Linda Scarpa like as a person?
Very personal. I liked her a lot. She was very cooperative with us, and she loved Gregory. There's no doubt about it. And she was willing, though, to help us with. She was very candid. Told us what the FBI agent did for Gregory with him. Not Gregory. I'm sorry, Greg. Gregory is the son. So she was. The problem was that when Greg died, her connection to the FBI, who was taking care of them at that point, was done, and she was very frightened. She thought that and she was being interviewed by reporters about this connection between this FBI agent and her husband, and she said, no, he's a wonderful guy. He never did anything like this. Never did anything. And it turned out she was doing that. She told me, she says, I did that because I needed him to stay on my side. I wasn't telling the truth, but I needed him to be with us. And that killed our case, because those reporters came forward while we were involved in the trial and said, this is the information I have from your star witness. And the DA, my DA, wouldn't let us go forward.
Do you think there's anything underhand with those reporters doing that?
Underhanded? I can't say they underhanded or illegal, no, because they're reporters. But why? Here's what I did say. Why did you wait until now to bring it to my attention? We're in the middle of a trial. I've been doing this investigation for a year or more, and it wasn't a secret. People knew. Plus, there was an indictment, a very big blowout of an indictment that was all over the news. Why didn't you come to me then? Why didn't you wait? So I'm suspicious that they waited for a particular time because somebody took care of them, perhaps, and said, now drop the bombshell, and that'll be the end. And it worked, because I have to tell you, Rob, I had to do a press conference in the hallway of the courthouse when I dismissed that case. That was as humiliating to me as anything that I have ever done in my career. So it was...
really?
Yeah, it was terrible.
When I said, I used the word underhanded, I meant dubious.
Yes.
And by the sound of it, you're implying that was dubious.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So it was. I wish I had it all back again. If I had, if I wish that I had. I had yet. I still had another murder. There were four, I think, that we and there was a fourth one of a civilian that was he was a friend of Scarpa's son that they killed, and I think that I could have convicted him on that case. But the DA, listen, I was not the boss. The DA said, her credibility is at issue, and let's do the right thing here and pull the plug, and we did. And I still to this day think that I would have been able to convict him at least for that one particular homicide.
Why do you think the DA dropped that case? Do you think
He
there's
was
anything?
just being no, I don't think so. The guy that I worked for, no, was not corrupt in any shape, matter, or form. Hey, he gave me the okay to do an investigation into the head of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn. That's the guy who is the kingmaker in Brooklyn. We went ahead and indicted him 4 times, and I convicted him 3 times. So if my boss was corrupt, he would have told me, gave me some excuse to stay away from this.
Yeah.
So no, the answer is no. I don't think so. He was being careful. He was being what he told me later on. He said we were doing the right thing. There was a question of credibility, and I think that it's best that we do it this way. He was very straight. He was a very straight laced guy, the DA. So
I guess there's always a question of credibility when you're trying to convict criminals, isn't there? Particularly if there's dubious characters that are trying to help prosecute them.
he was playing it very, very, very close to the vest. Very close to the vest. He didn't want to take any chance that his legacy was going to be, in my opinion, his legacy would be tainted in any way. That we went forward with a case in which a witness said that the guy didn't do what we said that he had done. And I had another case. I had another murder that had nothing to do with what she was talking about. But he chose to go that route. So there's not much I could do about it.
Gaspipe Casso, you met him a couple of times. What was this
Twice.
guy like?
Um, he was very, very willing to talk. Very open. I'll tell you what happened when I walked into the jail. Walked into the room where we were to meet him. I was with 2 detectives, and he walked in. The detectives introduced themselves, and they got to me, and I introduced myself, and he goes, I know who you are. He said, there's a lot, and then he made a joke. He said, there's a lot of guys in here with your picture on the wall that throwing darts at it. They use you as a dartboard. I said, really? I said, that's very cool. I said, did you read the book, Friends of the Family? He goes, yeah. I said, so what'd you think? He said, 95% accurate. I said, wow, I'll take that. And that was kind of the icebreaker. And he then went ahead and told us essentially his life story, and it was very interesting. He wanted to talk to me, as I told you before. Gregory Scarpa told me that he wanted me to speak to him. He wanted to talk to me because he was doing 17 life sentences, and he thought that if he gave us information that helped to break in old murder cases, that I would write a letter on his behalf, which I told him I would if I could solve these cases, and that he thought that somehow was going to help him. How he ever thought he was going to get out is beyond me. And that's what we did. And I talked to him about the Mafia Cops case, and he told me everything that I wrote about them was correct. And he admitted to doing what we knew that he did, which is to pay them off through Kaplan. And he called them his crystal ball. So when he needed information, he would go to the crystal ball and find out, who did what. And I said to him, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, why didn't you talk to me back when I wanted to talk to you, back when we were doing the investigation into these 2 guys? He said, Mike, I only found that out when I read your book. He said, my lawyer never told me that you were looking to talk to me. He said, if I had known that then, I would have done it back then. You know what that would have done, Rob? That would have allowed me to go forward in state court with the case I wanted to go forward with, which was the Jimmy Heidel murder case, and convict them. I would have convicted them in that case, and they would have done 25 years to life. I wouldn't have to use the feds for anything. But it turns out that what the lawyer had said to me back when I asked to talk to Gaspipe, he happened to be in Brooklyn at that time, as he was in the Brooklyn jail looking. He was going to be a witness for the defense in some case. And I said, he's in New York. Let me talk to him. And he said, sure, I'll let you talk to him. He said, what are you going to give him? I said, well, he's doing 17 life sentences. He said, no, here's what I want. I want you to give him immunity from the Jimmy Heidel murder case. I said, you got it. I'm a state prosecutor. I can do that. And he said, but I want to make sure that the feds don't indict him later on for that. I said, are you kidding me? He's doing 17 life sentences. The feds don't care. They're not going to waste time going after a guy who's never going to get out of jail. I'll give you the immunity. It's no problem. Let me talk to him. He said, unless I get the feds to give me the immunity as well, he's not going to do it. The lawyer never brought that deal to Gaspipe. Never told him about it. And he never came forward to tell me. He told me the whole story when I talked to him. Gave us information about other murders. We told us where murder weapons were buried and where all this stuff. And the problem was, Rob, that first of all, it was very difficult. There were old cases. It was very difficult to make a case. And if I made the case, he was the main witness. This is a guy with 17 life sentences. How can I put him on a jury and expect a jury to buy what he's saying? So I said, I couldn't call him Gaspipe. It was Anthony. And everybody used to call him Casso. His name is Casso, Anthony Gaspipe Casso. He hates the nickname Gaspipe. It came from his father. His father was a strong arm guy for the mob. And his father used to break like muffler pipes and use pipes there to beat people up to collect money for the mobsters that he was working for. That's where the nickname comes from. But he hated it. So he told me about. I'll tell you one quick story. He told me about a murder that he was involved in and had done, and I said, so where's the body? So he tells me. And he said, it's on off Court Street, which is a main street in downtown Brooklyn near my office. On this particular side street, there's a store there, and he's in the base, and we buried him and underneath the store. I said, okay. So I went down to the location. We would have detected. We found it. We found the place. It now was this very, very well-respected, attended Italian restaurant in that spot. And we went in the back where they said that he had buried the body. And we looked in, and the restaurant had cemented over everything. The walls, they had made shelves. Everything was all cement because they had put heavy duty, equipment back there and everything. I said to myself, what are we going to do? Rip this guy's business apart looking for this body that was buried? So it didn't do us any good. And another one he gave us, he said the guns in Sheepshead Bay. We killed him, and I dumped the gun myself in Sheepshead Bay. Told us around where. Now Sheepshead Bay is a interior body of water on the Atlantic Ocean, right off the Atlantic Ocean, in South Brooklyn, and it feeds into the Atlantic Ocean. It's a big area, and it's used. Boats are docked there, and they go out to the Atlantic to fish, etc. So he told us not exactly, but kind of approximately where the gun went in, and he said it should be there. I said okay. So I got the PD divers. We spent days in the bay looking for this gun. So we couldn't find it. So two of the things that he gave me, I couldn't do anything with, and I went back to talk to him. He gave me some other stuff, and we looked into it. But once again, Rob, at the end of the day, all I had was Gaspipe, basically giving me the information, and all I had as a witness would be Gaspipe, and it wasn't going to do us any good. But they were two very enlightening situations, sit-downs with him, It was it was very, very, very interesting. So, and he told me the whole story about the attempted murder on John Gotti, the where they blew up the car and Gotti wasn't in the car. He told me the whole story. He was behind it, along with Chin Gigante, who was the head of the Genovese family, and they wanted Gotti dead because Gotti killed Paul Castellano, the head of the Gambino family, without getting permission from the other four families. And that was, they held it against him, and they said, we're going to kill Gotti. And he hired a munitions expert from an army bomb expert, Gaspipe did, who was working with the mob at that point, to build this bomb. And they put it under a car on a spot where they knew Gotti parked his car every Sunday to go to a social club. The problem was that Gaspipe put the bomb under the car and walked around the corner waiting for it to explode. There was the person with the detonator was across the street from the car. He made a U-turn on the street, pulled up next to the car he was going to blow up, and set the bomb off. Idiot. I said, are you kidding me? This guy, he said, yeah. Turns out it wasn't Gotti in the car. It was Gotti's driver, but someone else. And this guy didn't know that. And he blew up the car, blew up this guy, Frankie DeChico, who was Gotti's driver, but didn't kill Gotti. Gotti then knew that Gaspipe was behind it, and he set up the attempted hit on Gaspipe, which the Jimmy Heidel, and leads us to the whole Mafia Cops thing. So Gaspipe gave me the entire. He even told me what they did with the car. The guy with the detonator, his door on his car got blown off from the impact of the car that got blown up, and he drove it to some garage somewhere in Brooklyn and parked it, and told us where it was. So we sent detectives there, but no longer wasn't there any longer. So if nothing else, I got a nice history lesson in mob activity in Brooklyn at that time. So it was well worth the trips.
Thank you for sharing that. That was fascinating. Why do you think Gaspipe's lawyer didn't present your offer to Gaspipe?
That's a very, very good question. The only thing I can think of is that he was being a wise ass, and he was trying to get whatever he could out of us, and he couldn't do it, and he didn't want to go to Gaspipe to say he couldn't get what he wanted to get from us. And it's the only thing I can think of. I don't know that that's true. He died, by the way, shortly after that. The lawyer is gone and died. Before I went down to speak to Gaspipe, he died. He died of, he was ill or something of that nature. So I never got the answer. I never knew it. I had no idea that that was the case until Gaspipe told me. But he did tell us, and I left. Before I left, I said, listen, I'm going to do what you want me to do. I'm going to look at all of these cases, but you got to tell me one thing. Where did you bury Jimmy Heidel's body? Because I want Mrs. Heidel to be able to find it and do something with it if we can find it. He said, you're never going to find it. He said, do you notice? And he gave me the name of a big housing development in Brooklyn near where the incident occurred, where he was shot at. I said, yeah, I know it. He said, well, they were building that. And the guy who was running the bulldozer before the cement foundation was laid was the guy we knew. We went there, dumped the body. The next day, they cemented over the entire location to build all of these houses. And Jimmy Heidel's body is under that, in that foundation. So at least I was able to tell Mrs. Heidel where her son's body was.
Wow, there's definitely no chance of retrieving that.
No, none whatsoever. None whatsoever.
This Gaspipe Casso was a total piece of shit, psychopath, one of the worst mobsters ever to walk the streets. Did he appear like that to you when you spoke with him?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I've dealt with these guys before and others. And there is they do have two faces. And it's I now know Sammy Gravano very well. I've appeared on his podcasts. I did a whole series of uh, I guess podcast shows of a different nature with him, and I know him. Now he calls me all the time. I talk to him. It's Sammy, it's Mike, that kind of thing. And Sammy, you wouldn't know. Sammy makes no bones about the fact that he was involved with the mob, but he's done. He's done, and but he's a very personable guy. And the same thing with Gaspipe. Gaspipe was a personable guy, and Gregory Scarpa Jr. Same thing. I said to him, "How many people did you kill?" He said, "Well, like my father, I stopped counting when I got to 30." So, what are you gonna do?
Fascinating. So
Yeah,
Sammy Gravano. So your relationship with him. You have a relationship with him.
yeah, yeah. For I appeared on. He started a new TV station, cable, not cable, kind of a YouTube station called Our Thing TV, and he wanted me to be one of the regulars, and I did a weekly show with him called The Bullpen, and we would talk about events of the day and current events in addition to other things, and we did it every week. And I also appeared on his podcast. I was the first guest when he started Our Thing TV, the very first podcast that he did on that TV station. Talked about the things that I talked to you about the dentist who was stealing body parts and
Yeah.
and all kinds of things. So
We'll chat if yeah. We'll hopefully cover that in a bit. Um, Sammy Gravano. So do you believe everything, all of his stories, all the stuff he's told you? Do you believe it?
from what he's told me, sure, I do. He's been very candid with me. Absolutely. I knew about Gravano well before I met him. I mean, he was a Brooklyn mobster. So we knew I knew a lot about him, and I learned a lot more after I left the office. I looked into him. I mean, it's just a subject of mine that I like to follow. And then when I met him, I didn't turn down the opportunity to meet him. He knew me through Tommy Dage, the detective who I knew, and Tommy said, "You two guys need to speak to one another. You both have lots of things to talk about, and Mike would be great for his for his podcast." And that's how we got to meet. And we hit it off. We hit it off very well. I like Sammy. I love it's the same thing. This guy, the guy that the book is about, Homicide is My Business. Luigi Ronce's Folly, right? He was a hitman for the Bonanno family. When
Yeah.
I met him, when they introduced us, and he heard my last name, he smiled. It was like he said, "Oh, okay, I got one of my people here." And for the next 4 months, I met with him almost every day and talked to him about murders that he did, all kinds of things. And when I left, I got promoted and I had to move to another part of the office, and I turned his case over to someone else. I felt bad about saying goodbye to the guy. It was, and then he went off to jail. So you develop these relationships. It's weird, but you do. You do. And I always thought about it. If my parents and grandparents were alive when I had Luigi as my witness, and I was with him for all of that time, what would they have said to me? Uh, you have a relationship with some guy who's killed 14 people, that. So the whole idea about some things make strange bedfellows, and that was an example. So these guys are not necessarily, they are who they are as far as what they have done, but that doesn't mean that they are snarling, psychopaths when you sit across the table from them. That's just not the case. Not the case. I had another guy who came to me, wanted me to write his second book. He had one book about his life, and he was a Colombo guy, another guy who had done a lot of bad things, and he was involved in the killing of Pope John Paul I. His uncle was a cardinal who had recruited him to get involved in killing the Pope because he was going to give the mafia a hard time, and he was giving the mafia a hard time. But they were involved with a guy named Sindona, who was a financier, a corrupt financier, and I got to tell you, I like this guy. This guy Anthony. I sat with him. We went out to various lunches with him. Sat and talked to him, and he's a personable guy. And he's not necessarily. I would not back then when he was doing what he was doing. I wouldn't necessarily go to lunch with him or have him over to my house for dinner. But that was it. So
what was his name?
Anthony Raimondi. He wrote a book called "The Bullet Hits the Bone," all about his life. He was a guy who got arrested, a kid who got arrested, did federal time, and during the Vietnam War was recruited to. Was given a choice: you're going to federal jail for a long time, or you're going to Vietnam. And he was taught by a guy named G. Gordon Liddy, who became famous during the Watergate era, who was a CIA guy, how to assassinate people. And he went over to Vietnam, and he became a sniper and an assassin over in Vietnam. Anthony's a very interesting guy, and to be very honest with you, there are people who don't necessarily believe everything that Anthony says, but he was believable to me. And there were some things that I knew from Luigi about Sindona and about that stuff that kind of allowed me to kind of accept what he was telling me about John Paul I. So,
because there is a lot of doubt over this guy. He's been discredited on the mob genre on YouTube by
Raimondi?
almost every. Yeah, Raimondi.
Yeah.
By almost everybody.
Yeah, I know.
And what you're saying is you tend to agree with his story.
I do. For one very good reason. I got information that he gave me independent of Roncesvalles, and Roncesvalles had given me information about Sindona and the whole idea of the Vatican and things happening in the Vatican in terms of money laundering and of that kind of stuff that kind of hit home with me. And so that's why I tend to believe him. Did I check out everything he's told me? No, I never got to do the book. If we were going to do the book, I would have done that. But there are a lot of people. I knew exactly what you were going to say to me because I've talked to other podcasters who say, that guy, are you kidding me? That guy is, people say he's full of shit. Maybe he is, Rob. I can tell you that what he told me about the information he gave me about the whole Cardinal Marcinkus and the Vatican and the money stuff and stealing. He told me before anybody ever did about the Vatican, the theft of Vatican stock certificates, and how the mob counterfeited the stock certificates from the Vatican, owned by the Vatican. They were selling them across the country. Now I heard that from other places. Now maybe he copied it, and maybe he was repeating what he had read somewhere, but he had a lot of detail about it, and so that's why I tend to believe him.
How come you didn't do the book with him?
He didn't. We just never developed. He couldn't get anybody to couldn't get a publisher to do it. His first book he self-published. He didn't want to do self-publishing again, so he had to get a deal. He said he could do it, but it never developed. So I did. He's got he does. I don't know if you've ever seen any of his podcasts. There's a 10-part series on him, podcast series about him, and he also cut a deal with a new group, the podcaster like yourself, and the producer came to interview me here, and that never got off the ground. I'm not sure exactly why, but anyway, so that's Anthony Raimondi. So, we started off by you telling me, how many of these wise guys did you meet? I guess I met a lot more of them than comes to mind until I start thinking about it. And there's a lot of them in there that I just don't remember necessarily. But I never would have even thought about Raimondi until we started talking. Oh.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing. Right, so you touched on him briefly. But another book that you've written and published is called Homicide is My Business, Luigi the Zip, A hitman's quest for honor. This is some story that you have with this guy, isn't it? A relationship, the dynamics between the two of you. Can you expand on that,
Yeah,
please?
I can. And then I'm just going to say that once we finish this, I do have to leave because I promised my wife that I would do something with her, and I've got to do it. So let me tell
Can
you.
you come? Can you? Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind coming back on and doing a part two, maybe next week
No,
sometime?
absolutely not. Absolutely. I was going to suggest maybe we can do a part two because the Luigi story is long and it's complicated and in my opinion, it's extremely interesting. And it involves, believe it or not, I don't know if you've read the book, but if it involves him becoming an informant while he was an informant. He was in jail and he in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn House of Detention, and getting information from murderers in there and passing it on to me. And it's a very interesting case that he gave me. And so I can give you, he's got the whole, I can tell you all about the whole Carmine Galante thing where he was killed and it was his people who did it. And Luigi gave me a lot. And Sindona, of course. I got the whole, all the information about Sindona. And Luigi's history is very, very colorful. And talk about the FBI, we can talk about
Amazing.
his hate of the FBI because of what they didn't do that they promised they would do for him. So,
Well, Gaspipe Casso says the same thing, right? He says the
yep,
FBI stitched him up.
yep, yep,
Whether
yep.
that's true or not, I suppose
Yeah.
we'll never
Well,
know. How long
so
have you got, Michael? Because obviously we will maybe if it's a long story, we can cover the zip one another time. But
it is a very long. It would take. We could do a whole show on just Luigi de Zit. There's a lot of about him, and because there's I don't know if you about Joe Bonanno and about Carmine Galante and the French connection as well as the pizza connection, drug cases. So there's a lot to talk about.
wow,
I like to do
how
that.
long have you? Yeah, I would love to do that. How long have you got left before you have to go now?
Maybe about 5 or 10 minutes. Nothing.
Right. Let me just see if I can squeeze in something that's probably not going to take you too long to answer. Let's go with your views on Rudy Giuliani.
Okay. Well, I know. Let me start with again. Let me just go back to Luigi for a second.
Okay.
Luigi does uh, during the time of the Pizza Connection case. Giuliani was the prosecutor, along with the guy who became the head of the FBI, a guy named Louis Free. And Giuliani um, was one of the people who was involved with Luigi and debriefed him, put him on the stand, etc. So um, I know Giuliani very, very tangentially. I don't know him very well. I know him as the mayor. I was a prosecutor during the time he became mayor when New York under Dinkins was a cesspool and crime was beyond. I was there were 2,000 murders, over 2,000 murders in New York City during those years. I was in the homicide bureau in the Brooklyn DA's office. We had a large share of those homicides in Brooklyn at the time. I was working as a homicide assistant and riding homicide duty, meaning when I was on call for 24 hours and would have to go to precincts, have to go to crime scenes, take statements. And there were times when I was out all night, sometimes into the next day. That's how bad things were. Um, we were in court. I mean, it was just terrible, terrible. Kept us in business. We worked our asses off, but it was a bad situation for those of us who lived in the city. So when Giuliani became the mayor, and there was this amazing transformation because he was a smart mayor. I mean, this whole idea of broken windows theory, where you go after the small crimes because they tend to be committed by guys who do bigger crimes. That was a major breakthrough and a thing that helped us, ultimately get back to normal in this city. And while there's a lot of people who put down stop and frisk because they say it was racist, etc., that did, the cops had some, and I'm not saying that some didn't abuse it because there were abuses of it, but that was another thing that criminals had to worry about, whether or not they were going to get stopped, and if they had guns on them, they were going to get, they were going to get found. So my feeling about Giuliani is that I thought that he was a great mayor for the city. He was a terrific mayor. There were times when he did things that I didn't agree with. But for the most part, from my point of view as a prosecutor at the time, he was a godsend. And what was even more important was that he handed the torch off to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg did follow the same kind of practices. And under Bloomberg, we kept crime down. There were times when, it was amazing that when you looked at the numbers at the end of a year, you went from 2,000 plus, down to 400 or so, or 500, which is still too many, but the comparison is the contrast is just stark. So Giuliani was someone who worked with the FBI agent who I had prosecuted, and who was probably a favorite of his, but I didn't interact with him at all. And the only time I ever met him personally was I went to a fundraiser for him, run by a friend of mine who had a small intimate fundraiser, and I went and met him, and that's how I know him. Now, his involvement with Trump, I have no idea about how he got involved with Trump or why he got involved with Trump, but I can tell you that from my point of view, I wish that we had the Rudy Giuliani from back then, as mayor of New York City right now, because the city is horrible. It's back to the bad old days. So, and the fact that we have prosecutors who are not willing to prosecute crimes and say that people shouldn't be incarcerated, they should be decarcerated, is ridiculous in my opinion. When you have a guy who's a shoplifter, a serial shoplifter, that's costing the owner of the store his business. That person should be arrested, tried, and convicted if he's guilty, and put in prison, because that's a incentive to not do the crimes. But we don't have that. We have people who are doing things and are not being arrested, and it also plays on the mind of the police officers. And they say, in my opinion, if I was a cop, I'd say, well, look at that minor thing. You're going to want me to arrest them? They're not going to do anything. Well, that minor thing that this guy is doing may turn out to be something horrific afterwards, where he does something else because he didn't get caught for the thing that he should have gotten caught for. So
the opposite of Giuliani's theory or practice. Absolutely.
Broken windows theory was, for instance, if you're a fare jumper and on the subway, you jump the turnstile, you don't pay the fare. Cops there to arrest them. You know how many guns were taken away from people? You know how many warrants were discovered as a result of people jumping the turnstile? It's amazing. And that's, people say, jumping the turnstile, poor people can't afford the subway. Well, then they walk. You don't break the law. If you break the law, then you pay the consequence. But, if you don't pay the consequence, there's going to be repeats. When you have kids, right? If you discipline your kids, you discipline them because you don't want them to make the mistakes that they're making now and do it again, correct? It's one of the reasons why you do it. And I don't mean corporal punishment. I'm talking about a lesson, Well, you're not going to have your iPad with you for the next day and a half. Well, that's next time he does something or she does something, and the penalty is, well, I'm going to take the iPad away. Oh, man, I know my grandson, if I told him, or my son told him he was going to take the iPad away from him, he would be on his best behavior all the time, So I don't see it working the way that the city is working right now. I just don't see it. And, that's what I have to say about Giuliani.
What's that down to? Is it down to the mayor? Is it down to the Democrats? Is it down to federal government? What's the reason that it's kind of taken a turn back?
We have a one-party state. Never mind a one-party city. There, if you're a Republican, you have no shot at winning an election. But Giuliani did. That was because of the effect that Dinkins had. Dinkins had no control over anything, and we had this horrific situation where there was riots for days in Crown Heights. A Jewish section against blacks and Jews were rioting against one another. That was a horrific thing. Crime was up because there was, Dinkins was not tough on crime. The result was Giuliani was a Republican. that it was a shock that a Republican would become mayor. The last one was probably during the '60s, a guy named John Lindsay. So, and then handing it off to Bloomberg because Giuliani was so successful. Once Bloomberg said, "I'm like Giuliani," well, then it was easy. People were just going to vote for him. And then we had 9/11 in the middle, which also helped, kind of push the terrorism was becoming an issue, and Bloomberg was tough on that. And so during those years, New York was terrific. It was like 20 years, 22 years, whatever. It was just wonderful. And then we had a guy named de Blasio who was elected after Bloomberg left, and we went back to the bad old days because he was a progressive, so to speak, what they call themselves. And, he thought that it would be best to defund the police rather than to have police officers do their job, and didn't believe in incarceration, believed in this decarceration. I didn't even know that was a word until just recently. Maybe it isn't the word, but in any event, that's my take on New York City. And when I go to, and I've lived in New York my entire life, Rob, my entire life. I never lived anywhere else. I've been in Manhattan. I go to Manhattan all the time. Used to go to Manhattan. Was not afraid to drive around anywhere in the city. When I go now in my car, wherever I go, I lock the doors. I lock the doors because if I'm at a light, I don't want somebody carjacking me at the stoplight or at a traffic light while I'm waiting to go across an intersection. And it's gotten that bad. And something has got to break. I don't know what it will be, but we'll see. We got a new election, and it's a mayor in a couple of years, and hopefully we'll have a new point of view from people. So
I've only been to New York City once, and it was November, December of 2006. And one of the things that sticks with me is you have like red squirrels, is it, running around right in the center of New York City? That's like proper bizarre to me. I loved it. I thought it was great fun. They're very friendly as well.
Squirrels? But anyway, they're all over the place.
Yeah, they were. Like, they would, like squirrels here, if you walk up to a squirrel, then they'll run away. But the squirrels there, you just sit there and look at them, and then they just come to you
they're looking for food.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't mean to divert to squirrels.
It's okay.
So, I was just going to say, I found it a safe city when in 2006.
Oh yeah.
Who was about then?
That was at Bloomberg years. Of course, it was safe. Yeah, it was safe.
Yeah, great time. Open top bus tours to Harlem.
Absolutely, positively correct. That's why it's so hard to now see what's happened here. It's just terrible. It was you can't use the word utopia, but it was a wonderful city with. You could walk at night. You weren't afraid to walk around at night. The restaurants were doing well. Clubs were open. Tourism was crazy, and it was wonderful. And it's gone downhill.
Very special city.
So Rob, I'm going to have to say so you send me whatever information you want about when you want to do this again. I really want to talk about Luigi the Zip. I think your listeners will love it. I think it's a great story.
No, definitely. Yeah, I really appreciate your time, and I'll drop you an email, shall I? Maybe tomorrow or
wonderful. We'll
see where you're at.
Okay. Very good, Rob. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the next time.
Yes, you too. Enjoy the rest of your day, Michael.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.